At exactly 0317 hours on March the 23rd, 2026, a signal that intelligence analysts had been dreading for 4 weeks finally detonated across every terminal inside the naval support. Activity Bahrain Command Center. The IRGC Navy's coastal radar network, a grid of overlapping Qadr and Noor anti-ship missile batteries stretching from Bandar Abbas to Chesham Island, had just gone active simultaneously. Not one battery, not two, all 17. Lit up at once like a Christmas tree on a threat display, they formed a perfect arc of death across the northern rim of the Strait of Hormuz. 3 weeks of U.S. and Israeli airstrikes, targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure, ballistic missile stockpiles, and command nodes had finally triggered the threshold. Tehran had unleashed its asymmetric masterstroke, the one weapon the U.S. could not simply bomb into silence without igniting a global economic catastrophe, the closure of the world's most critical maritime choke point. 20% of the world's oil flows through this channel every single day. At its narrowest point, just 39 kilometers wide, the strait is a tactical nightmare. Shallow, congested, flanked on both sides by hostile shore-based fires and riddled with natural hiding spots for submarines and fast-attack craft. The IRGC had spent 40 years engineering a layered kill zone inside that corridor. Tonight, they were executing it. Simultaneously, inside the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, operating 180 nautical miles southeast of the strait in the Gulf of Oman, the AN/SPY-6 Air and Missile Defense Radar painted a new picture that made the Combat Information Center go cold. 22 surface contacts, previously logged as IRGC fast patrol boats moored in Bandar Abbas, had broken from the harbor in a coordinated surge, fanning out in a swarm formation toward the shipping lanes at 45 knots. Each PACAP-class fast attack craft was loaded with C-704 anti-ship missiles and 324mm torpedoes. Alone, each one was a mosquito in a coordinated swarm of 22. They were a plague. This was Iran's mosaic warfare doctrine in its purest, most terrifying form. Saturation by volume, designed to overwhelm point defense systems through sheer simultaneous engagement geometries. The adversary had calculated that the U.S. rules of an engagement would create hesitation. A logical bet, but a catastrophically wrong one. At 0319 hours, 2 minutes into the crisis, Commander 5th Fleet, Vice Admiral Donovan Reed, issued a single encrypted order that cascaded through Link 16 to every platform and theater: execute Operation Trident Seal. This was not an improvised response. Trident Seal was a pre-planned, war-gamed, digitally rehearsed multi-domain suppression operation designed specifically for the Hormuz closure scenario, a contingency that had been loaded into the strike planning systems of the USS Lincoln's Air Wing 12 days earlier, the moment Iranian IRGC naval units began repositioning toward their wartime staging anchorages. The Americans had been watching, they had been waiting, and they were already inside the IRGC's decision cycle before the first Iranian boot left the dock. The opening move came not from a ship, not from an aircraft, but from 22,000 feet above the Gulf of Oman, invisible and silent. A U.S. Air Force RQ-4 Global Hawk, its AN/ZPY-2 synthetic aperture radar humming in wide-area surveillance mode, had been tracking the Bandar Abbas harbor sortie since the first patrol boat lit its engine, its sensor feed streaming in real time through a Q-band satellite relay to the Lincoln's Combat Systems Coordination Center, had it already locked every surface contact with a targeting quality track. The AI-driven NIFC-CA network, the Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air Architecture, distributed those tracks simultaneously to every shooter in the formation. There was no radio chatter, no standby for tasking. Every MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, every F/A-18F Super Hornet on the flight deck, every VLS cell on the USS Bunker Hill cruiser had already received its pre-assigned kill chain. The swarm thought it was racing toward an unprepared enemy. In reality, it was charging into a preset electromagnetic ambush. At 0321 hours, the EA-18G Growlers moved first. Two of them, call signs Viking 01 and Viking 02, had been airborne since 0200 hours in a pre-planned suppression orbit at 28,000 feet south of the Iranian coast. They activated their ALQ-249 next-generation jammers simultaneously, flooding the entire IRGC coastal radar network with digitally generated false targets and deceptive waveforms. In the IRGC ground stations, operator screens erupted into chaos. 40 ghost contacts appearing from every vector, indistinguishable from real aircraft. The shore-based Noor missile batteries, which had been seconds from firing solutions on the USS Bunker Hill, found themselves pointing at phantoms. Their fire control radar operators attempted to switch to backup frequencies. Viking 01 followed them there in milliseconds, the Growler's AI enabled. Jamming suite adapting faster than a human could type. The 17 coastal batteries went effectively blind in 90 seconds. This was electronic warfare, not as a support function, but as the opening kinetic act of the engagement, simultaneously, and this simultaneity was the key to everything for MH-60R Seahawk. Helicopters from the USS Bunker Hill and USS Chaffee launched a GM-179 JAGM missiles at the lead elements of the fast attack swarm. Not the whole swarm, not yet, just the 4 designated. Command and control vessels, identifiable by their slightly larger thermal signatures, and the elevated antenna arrays visible to the Seahawk's AN/AAS 44C targeting system. Without its command nodes, the swarm's coordinated attack choreography, the carefully rehearsed spread, patterns designed to saturate point defense engagement envelopes, collapsed into individual, uncoordinated attacks. 22 threats became 22 separate, disorganized, manageable threats. The IRGC's mosaic shattered into individual ceramic shards before a single Iranian missile had even been fired at a U.S. warship. But the surface swarm was only the first layer. The real danger had been assembling beneath the waterline since 0200 hours. IRGC Naval Intelligence had pre-positioned 3 Ghadir-class midget submarines, each barely 29 meters long, each carrying 2 lightweight torpedoes and a payload of 12 moored influence mines at the western entrance of the main shipping channel, inbound traffic lane 1. The Ghadirs had been lying on the bottom in water depths between 12 and 18 meters, their engines completely cold, using the ambient acoustic backdrop of merchant traffic to mask their presence from the P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft that had been conducting anti-submarine sweeps for the previous 72 hours. This was Iran's deliberate, patient, bottom-lay tactic, a doctrine refined from Soviet Cold War submarine playbooks. The mines, once deployed, would transform the main shipping lane into an impassable lethal corridor. A single Manta influence mine detonating under a very large crude carrier would create an oil spill visible from orbit and close the lane for months. Tehran did not need to win the naval battle. They only needed to make the passage too costly to use. At 0323 hours, the USS Vermont, a Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine operating at 200 feet depth, 3 nautical miles south of the designated mining corridor, received an automated NIFC-CA targeting cue from the Global Hawk overhead. The cue was not a confirmed contact, it was a probabilistic heat map, an area of elevated acoustic anomaly that the networks censor. Fusion algorithm flagged as statistically consistent with a Ghadir lying cold on a sandy bottom. The Vermont's sonar team, led by Senior Chief Sonar Technician Marcus Hill, had been working this exact contact for 41 minutes. When the machine's assessment aligned with Hill's own, that the faint 38 Hz tonal they had been tracking in the ambient noise was the resonant frequency of a Gadir's pressure hull under thermal compression. He passed the recommendation. Upward in under 20 seconds. At 03:24 hours, the Vermont prosecuted all 3 contacts in rapid succession with Mk-54 Mod 1 lightweight torpedoes delivered via ADCAP tube launch. The torpedo runs were less than 400 meters. All 3 Gadirs were destroyed before a single mine had been deployed into the traffic lane. The mining threat, the one element of IRGC doctrine that U.S. Navy planners considered the most operationally catastrophic, was neutralized in a 6-minute undersea action that the world would not learn about for 11 days. At 03:28 hours, 11 minutes after the IRGC's coastal radar network went active, the fast attack swarm, now reduced to 16 functional contacts after the command and control kills, made its desperate final push. The surviving craft, their crews realizing communications with the shore. Batteries were dead, and their sister vessels were burning in the dark, accelerated to maximum speed on individual attack profiles. The USS Bunker Hill's AN/SPY-1 radar handed off targeting data to the ship's Mk-41 VLS cells. At 03:29 hours, a salvo of 8 SM-2MR Block 3B Standard missiles ignited in rapid succession from Bunker Hill's deck, filling the night sky over the Gulf. With trails of white smoke, 4 fast attack craft were eliminated in the first salvo. The surviving 12 broke formation entirely and scattered, several turning back toward Iranian territorial waters. At full speed, the ones that kept coming were met by the Bunker Hill's RIM-116 rolling airframe missile system, the last line of active missile defense, which engaged 3 final contacts at ranges under 5 kilometers, then silence, then the echo of burning fiberglass on warm salt water. By 03:30 hours, 13 minutes after the opening radar activation, the IRGC's meticulously planned simultaneous multi-domain Hormuz closure operation had been completely neutralized. The electronic warfare architecture had blinded the shore fires. The helicopter strikes had decapitated the surface swarm. The Vermont had silenced the mining submarines. 0 U.S. casualties, 0 shipping lane mines deployed. The Strait of Hormuz remained open. What the IRGC did not know, and what the Kremlin's military advisors watching the battle, data feed in real time, were only beginning to understand with cold clarity, was that this response had not been improvised. Every element of Trident SEAL had been rehearsed in the digital twin environment of the synthetic training environment platforms loaded aboard the Lincoln Ford the previous 3 weeks. The specific swarm formation the IRGC used, a modified version of the one practiced in their 2024 Great Prophet exercises, had been pre-analyzed, pre-gamed, and pre-countered. U.S. Signals Intelligence had intercepted the IRGC Navy's command rehearsal frequencies during an exercise on March 1st. The pattern was recognized. The counterscript was written. When the IRGC executed its real-world operation, they were, without knowing it, executing the exact same attack geometry that the Lincoln's AI-assisted strike planners had already solved. The aftermath sent shockwaves through Tehran's remaining military hierarchy. The IRGC Navy's Deputy Commander, Rear Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, who had personally overseen the coastal battery activation from the Bandar Abbas command post, found himself staring at 17 dead radar screens, 16 destroyed or scattered fast attack craft, and 3 missing submarines, all without having successfully fired a single anti-ship missile at a U.S. vessel. The closure operation that Iranian war planners had described internally as their asymmetric nuclear option, the card that would force Washington to back down from any military confrontation, had been played and defeated in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee, the psychological blow inside. The IRGC's Naval Command structure was described by intelligence sources as catastrophic to morale. They had spent 40 years building and rehearsing the Hormuz doctrine. The Americans had solved it in 11 minutes. In the days that followed, satellite imagery showed a massive drawdown of IRGC naval activity at Bandar Abbas. The surviving fast attack craft were moved inland, deeper under hardened shelters. The coastal battery fire control radars remained cold, their operators unwilling to activate a system that had been instantly turned into a liability the moment it came online. The Gulf of Oman was quiet, but the silence was not peace. It was calculation. Because Tehran still held one card the U.S. Navy had not yet neutralized: the Karg Island Oil Terminal, Iran's primary crude export facility, handling 90% of the country's oil revenue. Reports from Axios indicated Washington was actively considering a naval blockade of Karg, a move that would economically strangle what remained of Iran's war-making capacity within weeks, but one that carried incalculable escalation risk. The question now was not whether the U.S. could defeat the IRGC in open tactical combat. That question had been definitively answered on the morning of March 23rd. The question was what Tehran would do when a regime fighting for its survival had nothing left to lose and an unstable nuclear research infrastructure still partially intact in its mountain redoubts. The strait was open, but the war was not over. And the most dangerous phase, the one where a cornered adversary calculates that a single catastrophic act of desperation is preferable to slow strangulation, had just begun. The lesson of the strait is not a lesson about missiles or radars or submarines. It is a lesson about information dominance, about what happens when one side in a conflict has mapped the enemy's entire playbook before the enemy takes the field. The U.S. Navy did not defeat the IRGC's closure operation through superior firepower alone, though the firepower was overwhelming. It defeated it through superior foreknowledge, superior sensor integration, and the willingness to delegate lethal authority to an AI-enabled network that operated at machine speed, below the threshold of human reaction time. The IRGC entered the Strait of Hormuz on March 23rd, believing it was executing a doctrine. It was instead executing a trap. A trap it had unknowingly helped design by repeating its exercises on frequencies that were already compromised. In the 21st century battle space, the most dangerous weapon is not the missile in the tube. It is the data set in the server. The nation that owns the data owns the outcome. Tehran is learning that lesson at a price measured in burning holes and political humiliation, as the oil markets absorb the shock of the failed closure, briefly spiking 14% before recovering. On the news, the strait remained open, and as diplomatic back channels in Muscat and Geneva begin the first tentative conversations about a framework to end the 4-week war, the world must absorb a fundamental geopolitical recalibration. Iran's most credible strategic deterrent, the one that gave it leverage over every Western economy dependent on Gulf oil, has been demonstrated in a live combat environment to be a defeated doctrine. The Hormuz card has been played. It did not stop the United States. And now Tehran must make its next decision without that card in its hand. What that decision looks like, and whether the remaining elements of the regime choose the path of negotiation or the path of escalation into territory that carries civilization-level consequences, is the question that will define the next chapter of this war. Stay vigilant, stay informed, because the men and women making those decisions in Tehran tonight are operating with nothing left to lose and everything to prove, and that is when conflicts stop following the rules of military logic and start following the logic of desperation. So I ask you, with Iran's naval deterrence broken and the Karg Island blockade on the table, do you believe Tehran will negotiate or escalate? Comment your answer below.